Good morning, it's Hazel Jarvis, it's Art Online, and today we're going to do a beautiful fall landscape. So I've printed out our image and I've done a couple of quick colour studies. Same image, just one more quick study on printer paper, and now we're good to go. Start with my yellow, and I'm going to put it on with a large brush, a number 10, and I just want to sketch in that first center group of trees. And I want to keep it pretty loose and pretty wet to start with. Maybe I'll just take this opportunity while it's wet to put in a tiny bit of orange and just brighten up this color over here and a tiny bit over here. So now, because this is a tiny island in a small pond, the next thing I want to do is put in some of the stones to anchor the baseline, both in the foreground and in the background. So for my stones, which I want a sort of a typical grey colour, I'm mixing my Periwinkle 61 and my Van Dyke Brown 47 together, and I'm just going to suggest some rocks in the foreground, like this. And then back behind, to get the suggestion of the land behind, I'm going to put in some more rocks. So now I'm going to put in a couple of rocks for the land behind the island, just a couple of loose marks just to suggest the land. And on the other side. After waiting a couple of minutes, I gingerly test it to make sure it's dry, and now I'm going to paint in a couple of tree trunks. And I'm going to do them as if they're interrupted by clumps of foliage. Next, we mix up a mossy green, 53 and 42, and I'm going to paint in the foreground of my little island. So again, with the green still on my brush, I'm going to go back in and I'm going to put in a little bit in the water in front of the island, just to suggest the reflection. So now I want to push the island forward, so I'm going to paint in some dark colour around it just to push that bright area forward. And I'm going to use a little bit of my burnt sienna number 46. And I tuck it in pretty quickly using large bold strokes and using also the side of my brush to paint. I want to capture the shape of this tree and this group up here, so I'm going to add some more yellow and some more orange. So adding more yellow and more orange, and again using sort of fairly bold strokes and the side of my brush. I'm going to take a little bit of that yellow and orange and put it into the water as the reflection over here. I'm going to add a little bit more red to this foreground tree and a little bit more over here. So nice and wet. And again, nice strong bold shapes. And just a touch of red in the reflection over here. So my island is pretty wet, but I'm going to go back and do another pass over the rocks to make them a little bit more cohesive. So I'm going back in with that same colour and just filling them in so that the white isn't too contrasty. When you look at the photo, you'll see that the water is actually much darker than the land. So we're going to darken in the water now. So I'm going to mix my indigo, which is 67, with my green 57, and start going close up to the rocks and painting in some water, but taking care not to paint over those lovely reflections that we already painted in. And this way you can start to cut in and create the shape of your landmass. So you'll see how by painting in the reflections we start to create this shape and carve it out. So the water gives us some nice hard edges in contrast to the soft edges of the foliage. And as we move away from the island, we let our water just get paler and the strokes get lighter. So when you look at my inspiration picture, you'll see that these pine trees are dead, unfortunately. But in our painting, we're going to make them alive. And now we'll just lighten up the paint and put in a little bit in the back too, but not too much. So I'm painting across because I want to reference the horizontal branches of the pine trees. So we have our basic architecture down. So what we want to do now is sort of pull it all together and make the island a little bit more important. Put in some darker colour at the base of these trees. And some more burnt sienna. So this is rather an odd sort of triangle sticking up here. So we're going to try and make it look a little bit less like a strange triangle and more like a tree. And I'm going to take a little bit of this burnt sienna and just add it around this tree trunk as if we can see through this tree to the tree behind it. And we'll do the same thing in a couple of other places. I want to get rid of the white holes here because they don't make any sense. They're too contrasty, and you have to imagine that we're in the thick of the woods, so we're going to add some orange in there. And as a general rule, if I add a darker colour on one side of a tree trunk, I have to add a little bit on the other side so that the colour doesn't stop too abruptly. So now we are very, very nearly done. All that remains to be done really is to put in some side branches and some closer up leaves. So we'll go back to our original mix, which is the 61 and the 47. We're going to knock off most of the colour on a paper towel, test it, and then we're going to just lightly flick in some side branches. And I would really suggest that you sort of practice this before you go on to your painting, just to make sure that you don't have a huge glob of paint sitting on the tip of your brush. So finally, I'm going to mix my red 30 with my vermilion 31, and I'm just going to sketch in just a couple of light leaves in the very front. And you want to put them in almost as if they're in a clump. You don't want them to be too separate. You want them to be a cohesive mass. And they're going to be almost like that little burning bush that one sees in the woods. You don't want to overdo this stage, so put in a few, then stand back, ask yourself, do I have enough? And then continue if you think you need some more. I think I need what it looks like with the extra leaves. I'm going to just strengthen one or two areas of the trunks, and then I'm going to call it done. Here you have a lovely, fresh, quick painting of an autumn landscape. So now all that remains to do is to go out and enjoy the outside. So I really hope you've enjoyed this project. I say that every week, but I hope you have. And I hope you have time to get outside and enjoy October. And I'll see you next week.